This is our chapter about endocrinology, and you will notice that when we talk about endocrinologic diseases, we'll go into and discuss extensively about mechanisms of actions of hormones, unlike some of the other chapters that we covered, where basically we talked about mostly about symptoms and treatment. The first part of the endocrinology section, we're going to talk a little bit about, introduce about general aspects about the pituitary gland. Now, remember the pituitary gland is kind of like the quarterback of the anterior pituitary, especially, is the quarterback of all endocrine organs. It secretes all the hormones, the TSH, ACTH, to regulate other organs in the body. The pituitary gland is surrounded by the sphenoid bone, and it's embedded in the sella turcica. And that's important because the optic chiasm, it's very close to the optic chiasm. Any adenoma that involves the pituitary gland, anything that grows, any tumor in the pituitary gland, it involves the optic chiasm. And a simple question they ask on the boards is, if you have a tumor in the optic chiasm, what kind of manifestations does it cause? And the answer is it causes bitemporal hemianopsis. So these people can't see on their temporal areas, right? They're looking like through a tunnel vision. So the adenohypophysis, the anterior pituitary, is about 80%. This is the one that we talked about that regulates all the other organs through TSH, through ACTH, and so forth. And then the neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary, secretes antidiuretic hormone, which is the main water-retaining hormone in the body, and oxytocin, which is another important hormone. Now, there's a question that they ask about primary and secondary aspects of a endocrine disease. And let's take, for example, the adrenal gland or the thyroid gland, and anything that we talk about that has primary dysfunction, for example, primary hypothyroidism or primary adrenal insufficiency, we're talking about the lesion being in the primary organ. When we talk about secondary hypothyroidism or secondary hyperthyroidism, it's very rare, but sometimes we see it, or secondary adrenal insufficiency, we're referring to pituitary dysfunction. Remember, that regulates all these organs. And sometimes we hear about the term called tertiary. Now, there's another level of control. So it's the primary organ, it's the pituitary, and above that is the hypothalamus. So sometimes you may hear tertiary dysfunction of an organ, and they're referring to the hypothalamus. I want you to look at the anatomically a little bit about, look at this anatomically. I want you to look at how close it's to the optic chiasm here. Right? This is the optic chiasm, and the hypothalamus is close to the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is what produces the hormones in the posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary does not produce any hormones itself. Those hormones get produced in the hypothalamus, right up here, right to the right of this area here, and for example, antidiuretic hormone gets produced here, and then it gets stored in the posterior lobe of the pituitary. So the posterior pituitary doesn't produce any hormone. It's a storage site for antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin, and so forth. The anterior pituitary is a producer of hormones, TSH, ACTH, prolactin, and so forth. So just remember that a little bit, because when we talk about the syndromes, you'll notice that different syndromes occur based on these relationships, the relationship to the optic chiasm and the relationship to the hypothalamus.